Hey there, everybody. This is Andrew Snort with Creative Community Solutions. And as you're aware, on the press and media end, we get an opportunity to cover some tremendous stories, tremendous people across the board, whether it's in arts and entertainment, sports, government, and politics, and other areas. To make sure to stay connected, visit us on the web at asnortonccs.com. Click on the menu for articles and coverage, and you'll find this article here. Add us on Facebook as well as YouTube at Creative Community Solutions LLC to watch the full interview as well as interview highlights. On other social media platforms of Twitter, Instagram, Ace Norton CCS, and make sure to stay connected on LinkedIn and Medium in order to read, watch, like, repost, all that, and then some regarding the story. So today, I'm so excited to have people share their story, which is a story of challenge, but potentially the story of triumph and getting things closer to where things can be. So I'm going to have everybody to introduce themselves for just a moment, starting with Mr. and Ms. Jones.
Hello, I'm Jalyne Evans-Jones.
My name is Eric Mario Jones.
Okay. And Mr. and Mrs. Jones, thank you for joining us. We also have leadership from the Gwinnett County NAACP. If you would introduce yourself.
Yes, my name's Edward Paul. I have the pleasure of serving as the president of the NAACP Gwinnett County branch here in Gwinnett County, Georgia.
Okay, so President Paul, before we get into talking with you, we're going to go ahead and pivot back to Mr. and Mrs. Jones. And Mrs. Jones, before diving in on your story, give us a little bit of point of reference, where you're from, and maybe, I don't know, one of your moving parts professionally and community-wise.
Well, I'm originally from New Orleans, Louisiana. I live now in Snellville, Georgia. I am a member of Hopewell Missionary Baptist Church, and my husband here.
Again, my name is Eric Mario Jones. I'm originally a native of Georgia, born in Albany, Georgia, military brat, moved quite a few different places, grew up in New Orleans, Louisiana, where I met my lovely wife of almost 31 years, coming this July the 9th. Moved back to Georgia in 1994 and have been here ever since. And our roots have now landed us here in Snellville, Georgia, where we currently reside.
Okay. Well, thank you so much just for your travels across the Southeast and other spaces and places. Congratulations on being married for over 30 years. Some people have challenges making it over 30 days. So congratulations to the both of you. So here you are, solid individuals, engaged in community, family, things along those lines. Walk through with us as best as possible that fateful day, which definitely would change anybody's life.
I'll let my wife start, because on that particular date of this particular incident, she had awakened early that morning to bring her cousin, who was visiting us from New Orleans, to the airport, so she can begin with telling exactly how that day began.
So the morning started very early. I had to bring my cousin, like he said, to the airport for a flight back home, because she was here due to a funeral that we had in our family. And so we woke up very early that morning, about 7 o'clock, because her flight was at 10. So we had to leave to get her to the airport. Everyone knows Hartsville, Atlanta Airport is the craziest and busiest. So you have to get there quite early. So at the time we woke up that morning, well, let me say that even before we woke up that morning, related to this incident, the neighbors, they had been moved in a week prior. So from the time they moved in and throughout the entire week, there was nothing but chaos and rumbling and noise in that apartment. And we lived in the community in that building where everyone was friendly and neighborly. But throughout that whole week, we just decided to let that the tenants in that apartment just get settled in and moved in, because of course we know that we're moving, there's a lot of shuffling going on, a lot of trying to get furniture and situated in spaces that you want them and all of that. So we just let them, get settled in. So for that whole week, it was a lot of chaos. And up until the point that the Thursday before this actual incident happened, which was on the Sunday, we had called Gwinnett County Police non-emergency line. We had called the leasing office to try to get some assistance, and we did not get any assistance. So that's why on August 13th, the morning I woke up to bring my cousin to the airport at 7 o'clock in the morning, they had music blaring. And what could I do? Nothing, because it was the time that they can be active in the community and have noise and all that stuff. So that noise, however, went on the whole entire day. And so at 10:30, about 10:30 or so on August 13th, it was quiet hours time. Quiet hours had started in the community. So because we had dealt with this a whole week, I thought that we would go be neighborly, because I had already reported it to the leasing office. I had already called the non-emergency line to try to get assistance from the police. So when none of that worked, I said, okay, let's go try to be neighborly, because to introduce ourselves and just to meet them, and, thinking that would, help them even get acclimated into the community, to see the type of people that they were living around, and just trying to be nice, honestly. And so we went up there, knocked on the door, never got a response from knocking, never who is it, never what do you want, not go away, get away from my door, nothing, except a gunshot through a closed door is how we were met with the greeting from the upstairs neighbor.
Okay. And again, you walked through, you documented where, again, you reached out to law enforcement, no response. You reached out to the leasing office, no response. The only time that you went over was because the noise was going on after the designated hours, and you just tried to use a professional approach, but the response was far from that. From there, walk us through as best as possible. After that happened, walk us through the steps that were taken as best as possible, and walk us through the initial outcome.
When you say what steps were taken, exactly what are you referencing?
So after you tried to meet with the neighbors, again, being as professional, courteous, and having that type of response, what happened next? Like, after that situation took place, what were things that you tried to do to, get this situation squared away? Because like you both have pointed out, the last thing that you're expecting, if you're approaching someone in a professional manner, is to have that type of response.
Well, immediately after we were met with the gunfire through a closed door, our first response was to run to the parking lot, to our vehicle. So my wife screamed out in pain, asking me to get her to the hospital immediately. Once we got to her vehicle, I realized that I did not have my keys nor my wallet. I yelled out to her, "Hey, I'm sorry, I do not have my keys or my wallet. I have to run back downstairs to retrieve that. Stay here, I'll be right back." So I ran past the shooter's apartment down to my apartment, which was directly below the shooter's apartment, ran inside the apartment to the rear of the apartment where my bedroom was at, to retrieve my keys, my wallet, and my gun, because at that particular time, there was still an active shooter, and I was not sure if there was still an imminent threat or danger lurking around the corner. So therefore, I grabbed my gun for protection, left back outside of my door. But meanwhile, let me back up a little while. While I was going down the stairs, I was contacting 911. I was on the phone with the operator before I had even entered my apartment to retrieve my keys and wallet. I was speaking with her and received instructions by the 911 operator not to leave the scene of the shooting, to lay my wife down and apply pressure to the area. At that time, the only area that I knew that she had been struck was her abdomen. It was later discovered that her hand had been hit as well by the bullet fragments and shattered her hand into hundreds of pieces, which caused metal rods, pins, and other things, hardware, to be put into her hand to reconstruct a hand that she's no longer has use of.
Okay. So here you are trying to have the best response possible. Obviously, there's injury or worse, for lack of a better term. You're making sure that you have all your things together. You're following protocol as best as possible. Walk us through, upon, I'll say, treatment. Walk us through, any charges that were pressed, any things that were filed. Walk us through that process as best as possible.
But
Initially,
the Gwinnett County Police arrived on the scene. EMS units arrived shortly thereafter. I pointed out to one of the officers who arrived on the scene, the shooter who was who appeared to be trying to flee the scene because he was outside of the building, outside of his apartment, closer towards the parking area, appearing as though he was just an observer of whatever commotion had taken place, but he was not aware of, what had happened. So I pointed him out to the officers and said, "There's the shooter right there." And they immediately grabbed him, placed him in handcuffs. My wife was transported to Gwinnett Northside Hospital, where she required immediate surgery. I remained on the scene shortly prior to her being transported and spoke with Gwinnett Police to let them know that I had a firearm and I had placed it on the floorboard. But before exiting, to go to the hospital, I did not see the firearm. So therefore, I wanted to make sure that Gwinnett Police had retrieved that and that we weren't looking into another issue with, someone who was an observer picking up the weapon and taking off with it. And then we have a reported stolen weapon that we would have to deal with at that point. One of the detectives, I do not recall his name, came over to the emergency room and took an interview with me. And I believe the next day or day after was my first meeting with Detective Battersby and his partner. I do not recall that detective's name either, who met me at the hospital. They questioned me in reference to certain things. They also questioned my wife that same day. I think they came back on another occasion to ask some additional questions. On this particular time, the detective Battersby had requested for my wife's medical records, and she contacted me, and I asked, what is the reason why they're requesting your medical records, not requesting anything from the shooter? Because there was no toxicology report taken on the night of the shooting. He admitted to consuming alcohol from what the police report says, from 3 p.m. to 10 p.m. They did not do any type of blood testing to test whether or not he had consumed any type of illicit drugs or anything of that nature. But they wanted to have these records of my wife. So I felt a certain kind of way about that. And my wife refused, told him he could not obtain her records. He then went to her nurse behind her back and said he wanted to obtain her records and that she had, I guess, given permission. So she came back in and confirmed that information with my wife and said, no, I implicitly told him no, that he could not have my medical records. So at that particular point, I then filed a complaint with Gwinnett Internal Affairs for a HIPAA violation, which they then came back and told me he had every right to request those records. And, it just from the date of the incident, you know, it was later discovered that it was initially submitted as a charge of a felony charge for aggravated battery or aggravated assault. I'm not exactly sure. Detective Battersby went before the particular judge, the magistrate judge, and requested that the charges be lowered to a misdemeanor, reckless conduct. How he came about this decision of reckless conduct for someone shooting behind a closed door with someone, you know, for someone, there was no signs of any type of forced entry. He was not in any imminent danger or threat. You know, so all of this could have been easily determined through a thorough investigation. In my opinion, there was no investigation that was done at all, because the paperwork that I received from the district attorney's office after the case had been dismissed, I read through it thoroughly, and there was really nothing at all that stood out.
And it sounds like, just from what you shared, clearly there's question regarding the investigation, what was done, what was omitted. You noted, and there have been reports that have come out, that the shooter, in all likelihood, there's a strong possibility of him being intoxicated or worse, because he had been drinking all day. So there are questions regarding, how do you lower, this is the question that I'm kind of gathering from you. How can you justifiably lower a charge when there are conditions present which would result in something a whole lot more aggravated or worse? That's kind of how I'm trying to condense what you've shared with us. Obviously, we hope, you know, for as solid a recovery as possible, but the big question that I'm getting, and it's probably a parallel question, how can you lower a charge when there are questions about gathering evidence and questions about if this person was in this type of condition? How can you justify lowering the charge? That's kind of the question that I'm getting. And I'm going to pause there, because I want to throw that question to the president of the NAACP, which in all likelihood, I'm guessing, is part of the reason why they're taking up and advocating with and for you. So President Paul, if you can join us. Again, the question is, how do you lower or diminish a case when there's, again, questions regarding gathering evidence and question regarding the state of the shooter? Because this is just me. If I've been drinking all day, I'm probably not going to be in the best frame of mind, for lack of a better term. So, President Paul, I'd like to throw that question to you, please.
Yeah. So when we got the complaint, I think it came to our organization back in April of this year. You know, we looked through it. It took us some months, because it was a lot of material that Mr. and Mrs. Jones provided about the complaint. And I had this discussion with some attorneys that are members of our organization, just to talk about, because my biggest issue was, why was the charges completely dismissed by the local DA? You know, I kind of got some insight on, you know, why, because I think initially when the charge happened, at least from my recollection, first of all, I want to correct something the DA said to our press conference on Friday. She said the guy wasn't arrested. That was a lie. That's not true. The guy was arrested and charged. I think initially it was a misdemeanor. It went to the Solicitor General's office, and she escalated it up as a felony based on the evidence she had. And so my issue was, why was it completely dismissed? Now, I asked our couple of attorneys within our organization, you know, why wouldn't this be considered a felony? Their explanation to me would be, well, you have to prove intent. You know, was it intentional, or was this just something, hey, he was high or drunk and out of his mind, and he just accidentally pulled the trigger? Because even reading some of the witness statements, one of the witnesses kind of said that the gun just discharged. You know, and everybody that gave witness statements, and all of this is public record now, but reading over those witness statements, everybody pretty much gives the same story. We heard a loud knock at the door. Everybody was kind of a little shocked of the loud knock. The music was muted, and then we heard a gun go off. One witness pretty much stated to imply that the guy never even got a chance to see who was at the door. But the gun just fired. So is that because, once again, he's high, he's drunk? And again, that was a missed opportunity by law enforcement. Should have been a toxicology report done. Should have been blood work done to verify, okay, what type of drugs was this guy had in his system? That was pretty much a missed opportunity by law enforcement to verify what was the state of the mind of the shooter when all of this happened. That those things should have taken place. And so it sounds like to me that's could have been what happened, and based on that type of framing, from what I've been told by attorneys within our organization, that's why worst case scenario or best case, depending on how you want to look at it, he should at least been charged with a misdemeanor for this. If you're going to say, okay, he didn't intentionally have a grudge against the Joneses and this was just, that's the minimum he at least should have been charged with, is a misdemeanor. And our biggest concern was, from the DA's perspective, and the reason we wanted to meet with the DA before we had the press conference, is why didn't you charge anything? You just completely dismissed the case. Because in our opinion, that sets a precedent that anybody can say, oh, I feared for my life. I think I saw a weapon, or I think I heard a weapon outside my door, and so I just fired my gun and shot him. Now, what if next time this is a child? What if next time this is fatal? The person dies. It sets a bad precedent. So you can imagine our disappointment when we went to the district attorney's office to get answers that we were met with, get the hell out of my office. That was, my opinion. I had some of the board members of our national organization that I discussed this story with. They were not happy. They're still ticked off about that behavior and want us to go through whatever measures we can take to have the DA's office investigated for this based on that type of behavior when someone's coming to you, which is why, when we had our press conference, I raised a concern when we went from Danny Porter, who was a white district attorney, to now we have a black woman district attorney. Did we get improvement in our community by switching the people out? Are we getting the service we get? Because again, the way I was treated as a president of the oldest civil rights organizations in the country, we could have got that from Danny Porter's office. When we go to you and you look like us, people elect you because they're hoping that you will be able to empathize and sympathize with the situation. And as I stated in the press conference Friday, the Joneses wasn't treated like the victims. They was treated like they was the aggressors. And we see too many times in these cases when Black people are victims of violence, especially when the opposition happens to be non-Black, too many times we're treated like we're the aggressors and we're not treated like the victims. And that's really, more than anything, is what got us involved in this case.
Okay, so let me throw this out at both of you, and and of course you've taken time to think, recall, all this type of thing. The takeaways I'm getting include questions regarding the integrity of the investigation, especially when there's the possibility of, if a toxicology report is done, it could validate the claims regarding that this person had been inebriated pretty much the entire day. Second, the question of precedent, where if someone makes the statement, I fear for my safety, now that's kind of a cover for people to just kind of blindly or randomly almost do whatever without any consequence. So we're looking at, again, integrity of the investigation, the possibility of setting a very bad precedent that technically some of the, like that chain of evidence, or like you said, if it's a felony, you have to establish that there was some type of, I'll say, relationship or preconceived plan or what have you. But even if this was something random, there still needs to be a consequence, because it comes back to the point that I raised earlier. When you're approaching someone in a professional manner just to try to get clarity, the last thing that you are expecting is to have that type of response. So in thinking about those moving parts, let me kind of simplify it. What are the current steps being taken, and what is the outcome you'd like to see in light of the questions regarding the integrity of the investigation, and the possibility of having a negative precedent set if this goes unaddressed or unaccounted for. And let's start with the family.
Well, first, I want to point out something that I think is very, very important. Out of the 4 or 5 witnesses that appear on the official report that are part of government public records, the 4 or 5 witnesses were all witnesses who were in the same apartment with the shooter. The DA's star witness that they allegedly have appears nowhere as a witness on any of the reports. But she specifically told Mr. Paul during his meeting that their star witness saw me with a gun after the shooting occurred. Why does that person's name not appear anywhere on official report as a witness if this is accurate and true? You know, there was a lot of inconsistencies. I provided a lot of valuable information to President Paul to show through a timeline that the information that she had reported to the officers was totally inaccurate. None of this information was investigated by the DA's office. My first encounter with the assistant district attorney, he summed me up as an angry black man. What was I supposed to be other than someone who was angry and pissed off by the fact that their wife had just been shot behind a closed door and nothing had been done at all but a slap on their wrist? And then 2 or 3 days after the incident occurred, I went to the apartment with my daughter to get some clothing, and lo and behold, who do I see pull up in the parking spot? The shooter. He walks right past me when my wife is still laying in a hospital bed with a bullet lodged centimeters from her back, from her spine.
Until December. And
he thought I was supposed to be just some chipper, jolly old person, I guess. I'm just supposed to overlook all of this, of what's transpired. And the only communication that ever took place between the DA's office was prompted by me. They never once reached out to me and said, hey, Mr. Jones, we would like to meet with you and Mrs. Jones. We would like to ask you additional questions in reference to this particular night. Nothing as far as continued investigation on our part of asking us anything other than meeting with us and treating me as if I was the actual shooter. When we met with the Patsy Austin-Gatson for the first time, she came out, she, made it seem like she was very concerned, the most politically correct, caring individual who shows as much support and care for her community as possible.
Election time, that's why.
And it was close to election time.
That's why. Now we know that's why.
And then she basically brushed us off and told us she was going to look into the matter and she would follow back up with us. It wasn't until after the election was over and still didn't hear from her. It wasn't until the middle part of January when I reached out to their office to find out an updated status, where I was notified by one of their senior leadership that the case had been dismissed. And then asked for the copy of the official public records and noted after reading that they notified the shooter the day before, and we weren't even notified until afterwards that he had been notified that the case had been dismissed. So we were totally treated with a lack of respect or concern as victims. So therefore, I feel is very important for the governor, Brian Kemp, and the AG, Chris Carr, to get involved in this matter and make sure that this case gets reopened and there's a independent investigation done. Otherwise, what are we having these officials hold their office for? They're doing absolutely nothing for the citizens of the state of Georgia.
Okay. So having jotted this down and listening to what you've articulated, moving forward, the things that you're focused on are having a reopening of the case.
Yes.
And then investigation, especially with those gaps that are apparent by the first wave of, I'll say, case handling. Of course, some of the bigger picture pieces for making sure that what has taken place with you obviously does not happen with somebody else, because if so, it sets a very dangerous precedent. So it's not just looking for you. You are using your experience to say, look, we don't want what has happened to us to happen to somebody else, because if this kind of goes by the wayside, it is setting a very dangerous precedent where the outcome, as challenging as the outcome, I'll say initially is, we all can agree the outcome could have been far worse. And so for the potential of something far worse happening, these are the things that you are calling for. President Paul, in addition to what's been stated, what are things that you are acting on and calling for related to what has been described and explained here?
Yeah, sure. First thing, I'm gonna give a few action items for the community that they can do to help get involved. And then what I'll do, I'll follow that up with a rebuttal to the state attorney general saying they don't have jurisdiction to get involved. I'm gonna read the email I sent them verbatim about their jurisdiction to get involved. So the first thing is we're asking for people to contact the governor. He does not have a email address, but you can use his mailing address, which is 206 Washington Street, like the president, Suite 203. And then you can put a comma behind Suite 203 and say state capital. And that's at Atlanta, Georgia, 30334. So that's 206 Washington Street, Suite 203, comma, state capital. And then you can put Atlanta, Georgia, 30334. Please mail him a letter asking for independent investigation of the Jalyne Evans-Jones case. Because again, she was not treated like a victim. We feel like the Georgia law has a bill called the Victims Bill of Rights, where victims are supposed to be consulted and followed up with throughout the case. As Mr. and Mrs. Jones laid out, they had to reach out to the DA's office, not the other way around. The local DA, Patsy Austin-Gatson, never treated them like the victim. So in our opinion, her Victim Bill of Rights were violated. And that's why independent investigation needs to be done, not only on this particular case, but on the local district attorney and her office and how they handled the case. And so for the attorney general, his email is agcar. So it's A as in alpha, G as in golf, and then car, CARR, at law.ga.gov. Again, it's agcar@law.ga.gov. Now, of course, the attorney general is going to try to say that he does not have any jurisdiction. At least that's, we've been getting a lot of that lately about different complaints, not only with this one, but also the Lewis twins, and also a complaint we had out against GCPS violation of the Open Meetings Act. So since we're on this particular case, I'll talk about his jurisdiction in this case. So let me pull up my additional email to them and read it verbatim. And they did email us back after several emails to them requesting that they get involved. They waited to the day of the press conference this past Friday to finally email us back. So I'm just going to read my response back to them after they tried to say that they could not get involved or didn't have any jurisdiction. So under OCGA 45, shall I say, -15-10. Again, that's OCGA 45-15-10. The Attorney General is granted the authority to institute and prosecute appropriate legal proceedings on behalf of the state in any matter affecting the general public interest, when directed by the governor or when the public interest requires. This includes matters involving potential misconduct by public officials or a miscarriage of justice within the state judicial system. Moreover, OCGA 15-18-6 establishes that district attorneys are subject to removal for willful misconduct, and the Attorney General may assist in or investigate such matters when warranted. We believe the documented behavior of the District Attorney's Office towards Mrs. Jalyne Evans-Jones, including the failure to treat her as a victim, deny her protections outlined in the Crime Victims Bill of Rights, which is OCGA 17-17-1, raises substantial concerns that merit your office's attention. Finally, the Georgia Constitution authorizes the Attorney General to provide oversight when local law enforcement or prosecutorial discretion appears to have been abused in ways that erode public trust. Given these provisions, we respectfully request your office reconsider this position. And so our request was for them to open a preliminary inquiry into potential misconduct in handling of this case, formally refer the matter to Prosecuting Attorneys Qualifications Commission, or facilitate a review by the governor under the constitutional authority. So those are the legal ways that the AG's office has to get involved in this case. And we feel like, once again, as I stated before, Mrs. Jones, Crime Victim Bill of Rights, they were violated. She was never treated like the victim. Everybody treated her like the victim, from the local law enforcement to the Solicitor General. It just, until the case got into the hands of the district attorney, it was sat on for almost 2 years or a year and a half. And then it was just dismissed. And there was never any communication to them why I was getting dismissed. Until after the fact. That should have been some type of consultation as part of that Crime Victim Bill of Rights Act. That should have been part of that conversation. And my whole thing is, either these laws mean something or they don't. I think it's a bad precedent for somebody, as I stated in our press conference on Friday, that's wanting our vote for governor, when you're not enforcing the law as an attorney general. How can we trust that you're going to be you want more power? You want to be the top person in the entire state. Now you want to be the executive of this entire state, when you're not executing your power as attorney general to protect citizens from incidents like this, from protecting precedent, from not only being precedent in Gwinnett County, but being a precedent throughout the state, where people can just fire their weapon through a closed door and just say, hey, I fear for my life. Or I think I looked at the peephole and I looked at my ring door camera and I think I saw a gun, appeared to be a gun. So I just started shooting. Again, this is it's not the Wild Wild West. We're supposed to be a nation of laws. Republican Party as a whole pride themselves on enforcing the law and law and order. Well, now it's time for two Republican, both for governor and attorney general, to live up to that billing.
So as we are taking all this in, and as we get ready to wind down for now, this part of the conversation, which is ongoing, if people do not recall some of the particulars of the case, if people do not recall the key themes and key takeaways from questions of the integrity of the investigation, the integrity of the larger processes, and the scary potential of setting a very bad precedent that will not only impact the lives of the people who are directly involved, but the lives of residents in the state of Georgia. If people don't remember any of those moving parts, President Paul, what is one takeaway that you want people to have? And then we'll ask the family what's one takeaway. But let's start with President Paul, and then we'll close out with the family.
I think the key takeaway people need to understand is, voting matters, right? Who we vote for, vetting these candidates prior to taking office matters, making sure we got candidates not only at the local level, but the state level, that when things like this happen, they're going to enforce the law. And so the key takeaway for me that I want people to take away from this is, all politics are local. We wouldn't have to be, asking and pleading to the governor and state AG to get involved. If we had a local district attorney that was willing to properly investigate the case, if her team was willing to treat this couple like they were the victims, because someone did permanently get injured in this situation. Again, it's not a situation where a gun went off and nobody got hurt and maybe you're dismissing the charges. I mean, I wouldn't probably accept that, but I wouldn't be fighting probably as hard if nobody had got hurt. Still not a good proper precedent to set, in my opinion. So I guess I probably would still fight, but I'm fighting 10 times harder because somebody is permanently injured. And so it's disappointing to me when this district attorney swore me, myself, and the rest of my executive committee team back in January to do the very same thing that I'm doing as part of the oath I swore to uphold. When I finally have to, you're the one that I'm addressing about this, your first reaction to that conversation is to tell me to get the hell out. That's a problem. And so again, as voters, we have to ask ourselves, is that the type of person we want in leadership, in a position that carries so much weight, to be leading the community, that when, hey, something happens in our community, she's going to pick and choose which cases she will take, which ones she won't take based on political basis, based on right and wrong. And because there's a reason that case kind of got swept under a rug, for almost a year and a half. Politically, I'm assuming maybe she didn't want, because it involved a Latino shooter and a black couple. So I'm just going to remain neutral on it. And then after it's over with, then I just sweep it under the rug and move on. Well, that's a problem. It's also a problem when your office have dropped the ball on other cases like Jakisha Brown that I brought up, who, person got away, kidnapper got away. Other cases that I brought up at the press conference where people have gotten off due to technicalities by her office. And I've asked questions about that and what processes been put in place to improve it. And then you gaslight me like there's no mistakes and these things hasn't happened or these things have been reported on. So I think the biggest takeaway from me is, hey, all politics are local. People need to be following us on Facebook, following us on Instagram, following us on social media, because we're going to continue to hold elected officials accountable. I know that's something that our branch historically, at least since the passing of Reverend John C. Stewart, has not been doing a good enough job of. And since my ascension and the rest of my team that's involved on our executive team ascension into leadership, that's going to change. And so as that change, people need to be plugged in on what's going on. And so that come election time, you'll know who you need to be supporting as a voter come election time.
Mm-hmm.
President, thank you so much. And then we're going to close out with the family again. If people don't remember the specific shared or even some of the larger themes that we've talked about, what is a takeaway you would like for people to have as we conclude with you?
Same thing the president just reiterated. It is so important to exercise your right to vote, because one thing is true. We all get in an uproar and we get our boots on the ground when it's time for that presidential election, but it needs to happen in a more intimate setting for us. We need to realize how important it is for us to vote on the local level. The elections that take place in our cities and communities in our state is so much bigger than the media like to put on with the presidential election. It's all glitz and glamour and lights and cameras and actions when that presidential election comes about. But we have to really, 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 really exercise the right that our ancestors fought and died for, which is the right to vote, because that's where our voice gets heard. If we just sit back and don't realize the importance of that, then, we are harming ourselves. We're not seeing the bigger picture and we're harming ourselves. So go on.
I'll reiterate the same thing that my wife said and President Paul. Like the great leader, Malcolm X, said, we have to become more politically conscious and educated on the people that we elect and put into these offices. It's very important that we understand the importance of voting on a local level, because these are the type of laws that affect us on a daily basis. The judges that we put on the benches, the DAs that are elected to prosecute these particular cases that come before them. So it's very important to know exactly who these candidates are, what they represent, and what they stand for. Even though they may look like us, like it's always been said before, all skin folk is not kinfolk. And Miss Patsy Austin-Gatson is a perfect example of someone who is not like us. She obviously would rather be of some other race. It appears to me she is someone who is soulless person. Unfortunately, I hate to say so many negative things about her, but you know, the interaction that we had at church, meeting her and being introduced by our pastor, and she directly looking my wife in the face and telling her, "Thank God you're still alive and pray." That was her only response. So for people like her, we need to make sure that we're exercising our rights to vote and getting those people who are not doing the job out of the office.
Can I add one more thing?
Yes.
Just one quick thing. Let me say this. Some of the people that's in elected office, I don't know a lot of these people personally. I knew of them during my time as first vice president and political action committee chair and legal redress chair at one point in time, but I did not know them. So I'm still trying to get a feel for a lot of the people. Even her, like I said, a lot of people, text me after she swore us in wanting to know why, because I didn't know the background, I didn't know the history. And I'm sure that's how a lot of voters are. Sometimes they're not informed. If I'm president, I didn't know. A lot of other people I'm sure don't know. But I want to send something to a lot of our faith-based leaders. I've been meeting with a lot of different pastors of different churches and warning them not to endorse candidates when they're running, because unless you following what our organization is doing and you actively involved within our organization, coming to our committee meetings, you don't know what you don't know. And you ruin your reputation by doing that. I know she's built up a lot of goodwill with a lot of the community through Mr. Travis Gatson. And from all intents and purposes, everybody I talked to, her husband is a really good dude. I think he used to be in law enforcement for a very long time. But what I will say to those people who have a relationship with him, your relationship with him does not necessarily need to be support for her, because he's not the district attorney. She is. He's not making these decisions or making these final calls. She is. So I would say to a lot of those faith-based leaders and other community leaders that are afraid, or I wouldn't even necessarily say afraid, you feel like it's going to cause contention with your relationship with her husband as a means to not wanting to come out against her. I mean, you gotta question whether that's a real relationship or not, because whatever relationship you all have with her husband shouldn't affect your relationship from the reality of how she's governing as a district attorney. So I want to put that on the record, because I know she's built up a lot of goodwill off her husband's name and reputation. And unless he's going to run for district attorney in 2028, or unless he's going to step up and take over as district attorney, these people shouldn't allow that relationship that they have with her husband keep them from seeing the reality of how she's been governing as district attorney. And I just want that to be on record.
Okay. So I tell you what, at this point in time, we'll go ahead and pause. First off, I appreciate everybody being willing to take time, because time here is also meaning there's still time that has to be taken to continue to advocate, educate, inform, raise the question, and if anything, just trying to be in a better space each and every day, which sounds very basic and straightforward, but some days are easier than other days. So I applaud the family for taking time in just getting this far. I applaud the efforts that everyone is trying to do in order to see, how do we get this close to right, and how do we put something in place so if something like this happens, it minimizes the potential for what people are experiencing now for others have to experience down the road. As a reminder, you can catch our recap on our website, acenortonccs.com. Click on the menu for articles and coverage. You may add Creative Community Solutions LLC on Facebook and YouTube. In addition to having the full conversation that we're having now, we'll break it up into smaller segments so that way people can kind of piecemeal as they need to. The article will also be available in addition to the social media platforms mentioned, as well as Twitter, Instagram on Ace Norton CCS. Make sure to check it out on LinkedIn as well as Medium. And again, if this is your first time hearing about this case, please do not let this be the last. Please take time to read, watch, like, share, and simply raise the question. So in saying all that, we thank each and everyone for taking time out to share their story. This isn't the only time the story will be shared, but this is one of the times to share it.